In the coastal fog of Incheon, power isn't held by the mayor or the chief of police. It belongs to Park Sun-woo. Known to the underworld and the elite alike as the silent architect, Sun-woo does not rule through public speeches or flashy displays of violence. He rules through absolute, crushing leverage. At 34, his name is whispered in government hallways like a curse. He is a man of few words, carrying himself with a lethal, predatory stillness. When he enters a room, the air seems to thin. Seasoned politicians find themselves checking their breathing, and hardened criminals lower their gaze. The architect's reach. Sun-woo's relationship with the law is not one of evasion, but of ownership. He does not hide from the police. He dictates their budget. The Incheon Metropolitan Police operate as his private security force, clearing his path and burying his inconveniences before they can reach a courtroom. The government is merely a tool in his shed. He has used high-ranking officials to pass legislation that turns public land into his private shipping docks. And he has bought the silence of the judiciary to ensure his empire remains untouchable. To the public, he is a titan of industry. To the initiated, he is the man who holds the city's heart in a fist of iron. The Park Sun-woo estate is a fortress of modern glass and ancient stone sprawling across 40 acres of prime cliffside real estate. His achievements are measured in the scars of the city's skyline. The Black Crane Holdings, a multi-billion-dollar conglomerate that serves as the legitimate front for his global logistics empire. The Obsidian Fleet, a collection of armored vehicles and private jets that move him and his men like ghosts across the globe. His wealth is not just in gold, but in debts. He owns the secrets of the powerful, making him more dangerous than any man with a gun. He is a man who has never been told no, not by the law, not by his rivals, and certainly not by the people who live under his shadow. When Park Sun-woo issued the decree that a bride would be chosen from the girls of the town, it wasn't a search for love. It was a summons for a new piece of property to sit upon his throne. And in Incheon, when Park Sun-woo summons you, there is no corner of the earth dark enough to hide in. If you're ready to dive into a world of high-stakes drama, heart-pounding romance, and unexpected wit, now is the time to follow the journey of Park Sun-woo and Zahara. Don't miss a single chapter. Subscribe to stay updated on every dramatic twist in the Black Crane saga. Tell us in the comment section where you are watching us from, for we can greet you in our next video. Today's greetings go to Felicianchard 226 from UK. Thank for your comment and support. The decision was not born of romance, but of cold, calculated dominance. Park Sun-woo had reached the zenith of his power, but his advisors and the old guard syndicates whispered of his lack of an era-perceived soft spot in his armor. To silence them, Sun-woo decided to take a bride, but he wouldn't choose from the daughters of rivals who sought to spy on him. He would take a girl from his own soil, someone he could mold, someone who owed her entire existence to his whim. The decree didn't come via a simple town crier. It was a digital takeover. One Tuesday evening at 7 p.m., every television screen in Incheon flickered to a black background with a silver crane crest. The same message appeared on every smartphone via an unblockable emergency alert. Even the digital billboards in the shopping districts froze. By order of the Park estate, All females aged 18 to 25 residing within Inshen city limits are to be registered for the selection. Parents are to prepare their daughters. Physical presence is mandatory. Resistance will be treated as an act of treason against the city's benefactor. This wasn't a fairy tale. It was a death sentence. Parents who had spent years protecting their daughters from the Black Crane influence now found their children being summoned directly into the lion's den. In the suburbs, families began frantic, whispered packing. Some tried to drive out of the city, only to find that the police had established maintenance checkpoints at every exit. Flights were canceled. The city was a cage. Young girls wept in their rooms, some cutting their hair or trying to mar their faces in desperate hopes of being unfit, while others sat in catatonic shock, knowing that Sun Wu's decrees were never broken. When reports reached Sun Wu that some families were attempting to hide their daughters in basements or smuggle them out in shipping containers, he made a brief, televised appearance. He sat in a high-backed leather chair, a glass of dark tea in his hand, looking bored. "I am a man of order," he said, his voice smooth and terrifyingly calm. "Those who try to steal what I have requested are not just hiding a girl, they are stealing from me. And I do not take kindly to thieves. If a girl is missing from her home, when my men arrive, her father will take her place in my debt collection pits forever." The escape attempts stopped immediately. 2 weeks after the announcement, the collection began. It was a cold, gray morning. A fleet of black SUVs, escorted by police motorcycles with sirens silenced, rolled through the residential streets. Sun Wu's bodyguardsmen, built like granite, dressed in tactical black suits, did not knock. They walked into homes with digital lists. The scenes of chaos. Fathers stood in doorways, trembling, holding out their daughters' identification papers with shaking hands. Mothers wailed, clutching their children's waists until the guards forcibly pried their fingers away. The silent girls. Some girls walked out in a trance, clutching a single suitcase, their faces pale and eyes vacant. In the poorer districts, some tried to fight. One guard was struck by a brother trying to protect his sister. The guard didn't flinch. He simply neutralized the boy with a professional strike and carried the screaming girl to the van like a piece of luggage. The collection took 12 hours. By nightfall, hundreds of girls from every walk of life, Korean students, American exchange scholars, and daughters of African immigrants, were processed through the heavy iron gates of the Park estate. The main challenge for the guards wasn't the physical threat. Nobody dared shoot at Sun Wu's men, but the sheer emotional gravity. The air in the transport vans was thick with the scent of salt from tears and the sound of muffled sobbing. When the girls finally reached the mansion, they weren't greeted with a party. They were stripped of their personal phones, searched, and assigned to minimalist, high-end dormitory wings. They were told they had 1 month to learn the protocols of the crane before the day of selection. Locked behind 10-foot walls topped with sensors and guarded by men who didn't speak, the girls realized the truth. They weren't guests. They were prisoners in a golden cage, waiting for a man who didn't believe in the word no. Inside the walls of the Park estate, the atmosphere was less like a bridal suite and more like a high-security military academy. For 30 days, the candidates were subjected to a rigorous transformation process designed to strip away their past identities and mold them into icons of the Black Crane Empire. Precision and discipline. The girls were never truly free. Every hour of their day was tracked on digital tablets mounted in their rooms. They were woken at 5 a.m. for fitness and posture training. Park Sun-woo did not want a fragile bride. He wanted a woman who could stand beside him at a gala for 8 hours without breaking her composure. They were taught the hierarchies of silence. They learned who to bow to, how to speak in the presence of government officials, and the specific ways Sun-woo preferred his tea and his silence. They were briefed on the dangers of his life. They were shown files on his rivals and taught how to identify a threat. This wasn't about love. It was about survival in a den of wolves. Regardless of their nationality, the girls were put through intensive Korean language and honorifics drills. Sun-woo expected his bride to navigate his world without a translator. During their free time, the girls were confined to the central courtyard or the massive library. However, even their leisure was monitored. Microphones picked up their conversations, and guards watched from the balconies. Small factions formed. Some girls, driven by a survival instinct, began to compete, hoping that being chosen would mean safety for their families. Others, like the American and African girls, often huddled together in the library, sharing stories of home and whispering about escape. The most haunting part of their free time was the lack of music or internet. They were cut off from the outside world entirely, forced to focus only on the man who owned the house. The Crane aesthetic. The cosmetic preparation was surgical in its precision. Sun-woo's team of stylists didn't want pretty. They wanted lethal elegance. Every girl underwent daily skin treatments, silk baths, and rigorous grooming. Any scars or imperfections were treated with the most expensive dermatological tech. For the entire month, they wore identical slate gray silk robes. This was to ensure that on the day of selection, their natural presence, not their clothes, would be what Sun-woo judged. A custom fragrance was created for the estate. By the end of the month, the girls' skin, hair, and clothes all smelled of sandalwood and cold ozone, the signature scent of the Park family. The focus wasn't just on the physical. The stylists and handlers worked to break their spirits. They were constantly reminded that their old lives were over. You are no longer daughters, students, or citizens, their head handler, a cold woman named Madame Min, would say. You are candidates for the crown, and the crown is heavy. As the final week approached, the cosmetic focus shifted to the selection look. Each girl was assigned a specific style. Some were styled to look traditional, others modern and sharp. But for Zahara, the preparation felt like being prepared for a funeral. While others worried about their skin tone or their walk, she spent her free time mapping the height of the perimeter walls and timing the rotation of the security cameras. She didn't want the crown. She wanted the horizon. While the other candidates were busy meditating or obsessing over their pore size, Zahara was busy being a criminal, a very, very uncoordinated criminal. Zahara had spent the last hour in the main hallway pretending to have a spiritual crisis near a large decorative vase. When the guard, a man with the personality of a brick wall named Han, looked away to sneeze, Zahara didn't just run. She scurried. She navigated the mansion like a spy in a low-budget movie, ducking behind marble pillars and holding her breath until her face turned purple. At one point, she had to dive behind a rack of Sun Wu's designer suits to avoid a cleaning crew. She accidentally knocked over a shoe tree, making a clack so loud she was certain the SWAT team was coming. She froze, blending into the blazers like a very tall, very panicked Kenyan mannequin. Finally, she reached the blind spot she'd identified, the far corner of the north garden. The only thing between her and freedom was a 12-foot stone wall and her own complete lack of upper body strength. Zahara approached the wall with the confidence of a mountain goat, but the reality of a newborn giraffe. She stacked 2 empty potting crates, wobbling dangerously. "Okay, Zahara," she whispered to herself, "you've climbed mango trees in Nairobi. You've got this. This is just a very expensive, very Korean mango tree." She leaped. Her fingers caught the jagged top of the stone. Her legs kicked wildly in the air, scuffing the expensive masonry. She was halfway up, her face pressed against the cold stone, sweating through her silk robe. "Just 4 centimeters," she wheezed, her biceps screaming in a language she didn't know they spoke. "Almost. Over." The stranger in the shadows. "Are you planning to fly, or is this a new form of yoga?" The voice was deep, smooth, and came from directly beneath her. Zahara yelped, her grip slipping. She looked down, standing there, bathed in moonlight and looking like he'd just stepped off the cover of Vogue. Mafia Edition was a man. He had his hands in his pockets and an expression of pure, unfiltered judgment. "Help me," Zahara hissed, dangling like a piece of laundry. "I have 4 centimeters left. If I can just get my leg over, I'm gone." The man tilted his head. "I will not help you. Get down." "You heartless tuxedo-wearing gargoyle," she gasped, her fingers cramping. "Don't you realize there's a lunatic inside this house? A king who probably eats kittens for breakfast? My sister is trapped in there. I have to get out and call the embassy or the police or the Avengers. Please, just give me a boost." The man's eyebrow arched. "A lunatic? Kittens? That's a very specific rumor." "He's a monster," Zahara insisted, her toe finally finding a tiny ledge. "They say he can kill you just by looking at you. I'm too young to be a mafia bride. I have dreams. I want to marry for love. I don't want to be slaughtered like a goat at a wedding feast." "Get down." "No, help me up." Fed up with her vertical struggle, the man didn't wait. He stepped forward, reached up, and grabbed her by the waist. Zahara expected to be thrown to the ground. Instead, he lifted her down with terrifying ease, as if she weighed no more than a bag of feathers. He didn't let go immediately. He kept her pinned against the wall, his face inches from hers. Up close, he was devastatingly handsome and smelled dangerously like sandalwood and power. "You don't care about the prestige?" he asked, his voice a low hum. "Every girl in this town would give their life to be the queen of this estate." Zahara scoffed, trying to regain her dignity while her hair was a bird's nest of twigs and dust. "Then they're all crazy. I don't care about his money or his scary suits. I want a man I actually know. A man who asks for my name before he tries to own me. This Park Sun-woo is just a cold, dangerous ghost. The man looked at her for a long beat. A tiny, almost invisible smirk tugged at the corner of his mouth. A ghost. Interesting. Come, he said, surprisingly gentle. He didn't call the guards. He didn't pull out handcuffs. He simply took her hand, his palm was warm and calloused, and began walking her back toward the mansion. Wait, you're going the wrong way, Zahara whispered, yelled. If we go back, they'll lock me in the skincare dungeon again. Trust me, he said, his voice strangely calm. You aren't going to the dungeon. As they walked through the dark gardens, Zahara kept rambling. Look, if you're his gardener or something, I can pay you. I have $20 hidden in my shoe. Just let me go. You seem nice. Too nice to work for a guy who probably has a shark tank in his basement. The man actually chuckled, a low, rich sound. No shark tank. The maintenance is a nightmare. He led her all the way to the back entrance of the girls' wing. He opened the door and gently nudged her inside. Go back to your room, Zahara, he said. How do you know my name? She asked, blinking. He just tapped his temple. I hear things. And stay off the walls. You're terrible at climbing. Before she could insult his ancestors, he closed the door. Zahara stood there, dusty and confused, thinking, well, at least the gardener is cute. She had no idea. She had just spent 10 minutes calling the most powerful man in Asia a lunatic to his face. The morning of the selection didn't begin with sunlight. It began with the clinical hum of hair dryers and the scent of expensive aerosol. The mansion was no longer a home. It was a factory of perfection. With exactly 2 hours remaining, the tension in the dormitories was thick enough to choke. The air was a chaotic mix of frantic whispers and absolute silence. Some girls were vibrating with nervous energy, their hands shaking so hard the stylist had to hold their wrists to apply eyeliner. Others sat like statues, eyes red from a lack of sleep, looking like they were heading to a beautiful exec. Zahara sat in her chair, her heart doing a frantic tap dance against her ribs. She was scrubbed, polished, and poured into a stunning, deep emerald silk gown that contrasted sharply with her mahogany skin. But her mind was miles away, still replaying the gardener's face from the night before. At least I told someone the truth before I got stuck in this nightmare, she thought bitterly. When the timer hit 0, the girls were marched through the mansion to the grand obsidian hall. The room was a masterpiece of intimidation. The floors were polished black marble that reflected the ceiling like a dark lake. Around the perimeter stood 30 guards in full tactical gear, their faces hidden behind masks, standing as still as stone gargoyles. At the far end of the hall sat a single, massive chair carved from dark wood and steel, the Iron Throne of the Park Empire. The girls were instructed to stand in a wide semicircle. There were no chairs for them. They were to remain standing, shoulders back, eyes down, like a collection of precious vases waiting for an owner. A heavy silence fell as the massive double doors at the back of the hall groaned open. The rhythmic thud, thud, thud of heavy boots echoed off the marble. One by one, the girls bowed their heads. Zahara kept hers up a second longer than the rest, her defiance simmering. She watched as a figure moved through the shadows of the pillars. He was draped in a traditional black Mayan baka, king's robe embroidered with silver cranes that seemed to shimmer with every step. As he stepped into the light of the central chandelier, Zahara's breath didn't just hitch, it died in her throat. Her vision blurred. The gardener, the man from the wall, the guy who had carried her down like a sack of flour while she called him a lunatic and a monster. Her heart didn't just race. It became a drum kit in a heavy metal solo. No, 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 she screamed internally. I told the king of the underworld he eats kittens. I told the most dangerous man in Asia he has no heart. I offered him $20 to let me run away. Sun Hu walked with a slow, agonizing grace. He didn't look at the daughters of the billionaires. He didn't look at the models. He walked straight toward the center of the semicircle and stopped directly in front of Zahara. The room went ice cold. Zahara felt the sweat go cold on her neck. She forced herself to look up, her eyes wide and trembling. Sun Wu leaned in slightly, just enough for her to catch that scent of sandalwood and ozone again. He didn't speak a word, but his eyes were screaming. They were dark, piercing, and dancing with a terrifyingly playful light. His gaze swept over her messy, pinned-up hair, now perfectly styled, and settled on her eyes. It was a look of absolute, I told you so. It reminded her of the wall. It reminded her of his hands on her waist. His eyes traveled to her feet, as if checking if she still had that $20 hidden in her shoe. He held her gaze for 5 agonizing seconds. In that look, he sent a clear message. You wanted a man who knew your name? You wanted a man you had a connection with? Well, Zahara, you found him. A slow, wolfish smirk spread across his face teeth, same one from the garden, but this time it was the smirk of a predator who had finally caught his favorite prey. He turned to his head advisor without breaking eye contact with her and spoke 3 words that shattered the silence of the hall.
Take her suitcase.
The choice was made. The lunatic had chosen his bride. When the words "take her suitcase" echoed through the obsidian hall, the air didn't just leave the room, it vanished. For 3 seconds, there was a vacuum of absolute silence. Then the hall erupted. Zahara felt like she was standing in the center of a hurricane. Her knees turned to water. Her brain was a flickering neon sign flashing the words, I am dead. I am actually dead. She looked at Sunwill, expecting him to be laughing, but his face had returned to that terrifying, regal mask. Me? She finally squeaked out, her voice cracking. But I'm the one who climbs walls, Sunwoo interrupted, his voice a low rumble that vibrated in her chest. He stepped closer, leaning down so his lips were an inch from her ear. I believe you owe me $20, my bride. Before she could process the sheer audacity of his memory, 2 female attendants appeared at her side. They didn't ask, they guided. Zahara was whisked away through a private gold-leaf door, leaving the crying girls and the heavy marble hall behind. Zahara wasn't taken back to the dormitory. She was moved to the East Wing Sunwoo's private quarters. This side of the mansion was different. It wasn't clinical or cold. It was filled with deep woods, plush velvet, and the scent of old books and expensive scotch. Her new bedroom was larger than her entire family home in Nairobi. The windows were floor to ceiling, overlooking the very wall she had tried to scale. It was a beautiful, mocking reminder of her failure. The first week was not a honeymoon. It was a high-stakes chess match played with glares and silence. Zahara refused to wear the jewelry he sent. She left the diamond necklaces on the floor and wore her simplest cotton robe. When he sent a 5-course meal to her room, she asked the maid for a bowl of plain rice. Sun Wu didn't get angry. To the shock of his guards, who expected him to snap, he seemed entertained. He would often show up in her quarters unannounced, leaning against the doorframe in his shirt sleeves, watching her try to pick the lock on the balcony door with a hair clip. "That's a grade 4 security lock, Zahara," he'd say calmly. "You'll need more than a bobby pin. Try a tension wrench next time." He insisted she eat dinner with him every night. They sat at opposite ends of a long mahogany table. Zahara asked him one day, "Why me? There were 99 other girls who would have worshipped the ground you walk on." "Sun Wu, the other 99 wanted my crown. You were the only one who wanted the branch of a tree more than my hand. I don't like easy things, Zahara." "Zahara, I still think you're a monster." "Sun Wu, taken a sip of wine and I still think you're a terrible climber. Eat your steak." Despite the Mafia King persona, Zahara began to notice things. He never forced her to touch him. He never raised his voice. And one evening, she found a small box on her bed. It wasn't diamonds. It was a collection of Kenyan spices and a brand new pair of high-quality hiking boots. There was a note inside in his sharp, elegant handwriting. "For the next time you decide to run, at least do it with the right equipment." Fire, and he was the cold, unyielding stone. She hated him for taking her freedom, but she was starting to realize that in this house of ghosts and killers, he was the only person who actually saw her not as a bride, but as a person who was 4 centimeters away from the world. The wedding was approaching, and the town was calling it the event of the century, but inside the East Wing, it was a war of hearts, and neither side was ready to surrender. The 2 weeks leading up to the wedding were a psychological game of cat and mouse, but the cat was beginning to bring the mouse gifts instead of thorns. Park Sun-woo turned teasing into an art form. He didn't use fear anymore. He used presence. He would show up in the library while Zahara was reading, leaning over her shoulder to point out a difficult Korean word, his breath warm against her ear. "If you're going to be the Queen of Incheon, you can't mispronounce sublime," he'd whisper, his eyes dancing with a light she'd never seen in the tabloids. He was attentive in a way that confused her. He remembered her favorite tea. He ensured her family in the city was given a security detail, which she knew was a gilded way of saying they were safe but watched. And he never once demanded she act like a submissive bride. One evening, 10 days before the ceremony, Sun-woo summoned her to his private study. The room was dimly lit, smelling of aged paper and expensive tobacco. He sat behind his desk, looking every bit the king, but as Zahara entered, he kicked his feet up and smirked. "The wedding is in 14 days, Zahara," he said, his voice dropping an octave. "The tailors are crying, the caterers are trembling, and the government is preparing their finest tuxedos." "I hope they all have a terrible time," Zahara retorted, crossing her arms. Sun-woo laughed, standing up and walking toward her until she was backed against the heavy oak door. "Still so prickly. But I've been patient. For a week, I've been waiting for a gesture of good faith from my future wife." He leaned in, his hand resting on the door beside her head. Kiss me just once, playfully, if you must. But I want to know if that fire in your eyes reaches your lips. Zahara's heart hammered a frantic rhythm. In your dreams, Park Sun. Woo, I don't kiss monsters or lunatics on command. If you want a kiss, go buy a mirror and kiss yourself. I'm sure you'd love it. She ducked under his arm and bolted from the room, her face flushed crimson. Sun Wu just watched her go, a low, determined chuckle echoing in the empty hall. We'll see about that, he murmured. Hours later, around 1 a.m., Zahara was tucked into her massive bed, finally drifting off. Suddenly, the click of her bedroom door, the one she thought she'd locked, snapped her awake. A dark silhouette moved across the room. Before she could scream, a heavy, warm weight settled on the edge of the bed. Sun Wu didn't say a word. He reached out, his large hand cupping her jaw with the tenderness that shocked the breath out of her lungs. He pulled her upward, and before she could protest, he captured her lips. It wasn't the kiss of a butcher. It was slow, deep, and tasted of moonlight and hidden longing. It was a kiss that said, I've been looking for you my whole life. When he pulled away, Zahara was breathless, her eyes wide in the dark. Go to sleep, my brave climber, he whispered, his voice thick. Tomorrow, you try on the gown. And don't bother locking the door again. I own the keys to everything in this city, especially this room. He left as silently as a ghost, leaving Zahara staring at the ceiling, her lips tingling and her heart traitorously soft. Over the final week, the monster of Incheon began to crack. Zahara watched him from the balcony as he dealt with his men. He was firm, yes, but she saw him hand a stack of cash to a guard whose mother was ill. She saw him spend hours on the phone negotiating peace rather than choosing the gun. He wasn't the devil the rumors described. He was a man who had built a fortress to survive, and for the first time, he was letting someone inside the walls. The day of the wedding was a spectacle of power. The cathedral was guarded by 300 men, and the guest list looked like a who's who of international crime and high politics. Zahara stood at the back of the aisle in a gown of white lace and hidden Kenyan beadwork, secret tribute to her home that Sun Wu had commissioned himself. When the doors opened, she didn't walk like a prisoner. She walked like a woman who had finally realized that the man at the end of the aisle didn't want to own her. He wanted to be her partner in the storm. As she reached him, Sun Wu took her hand. His palm was sweating. The great king of the underworld was nervous. You look terrifyingly beautiful, he whispered as the priest began the rites. And you still look like you need a haircut, she whispered back, a genuine smile finally breaking across her face. The wedding wasn't a surrender. It was a treaty. As they exchanged rings, the town of Incheon watched in awe, realizing that the king hadn't just found a bride. He had found the only person brave enough to tell him no, and the only person he would ever truly say yes to. The wedding night didn't end with a demand. It began with a revelation. As the heavy oak doors of the master's suite clicked shut, Zahara stood by the window, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She expected the king to claim his prize. Instead, Sun Fu shed his heavy ceremonial jacket, tossed it onto a chair, and poured 2 glasses of water, not wine. He handed one to her, his fingers grazing hers gent. Zahara, he said, his voice dropping the boss persona entirely. Whatever is mine is now yours. This house, this city, my life. You are not a prisoner here. I will never force a version of love that you aren't ready to give. Zahara looked at him, her mind racing. She had prepared for a battle, but he was offering her a sanctuary. I only ask for one thing, he continued, stepping closer but keeping a respectful distance. I need an heir, not just for the empire but for me. Someone to carry the fire you have in your eyes. But, he added with a soft smirk, I'm a man who knows how to wait for the best things in life. Over the following months, the Black Crane Mansion transformed. Zahara began to fill the cold marble halls with her own life. She planted Kenyan succulents in the terrace garden and played loud Afrobeats in the morning while Sun Hu tried to read his morning briefings. She watched him. She saw how he looked at her when he thought she wasn't looking, with a quiet, fierce devotion. She saw the devil of Incheon settle a dispute over the phone and then immediately turn around to ask her if she liked the new curtains. Step by step, the wall she had built around her heart began to crumble, 4 centimeters at a time. One rainy Tuesday, Zahara decided the waiting was over. She spent the entire afternoon in the kitchen, much to the horror of the professional. Chefs preparing a feast of pilaf and niyama choma, the spicy aromas drifting through the vents of the high-tech mansion. When Sun Wu returned from a tense meeting with the city officials, he found the master's suite transformed. Candles flickered, the lights were dimmed, and Zahara stood there glowing. For the first time, she didn't look like she wanted to run. She looked like she was home. That night, the treaty became a bond. It was peaceful, tender, and the first time the king truly bowed to his queen. A few weeks later, the news broke. The House of Park was expecting, and that is when the great Mafia Boss officially lost his mind. 3 a.m., Zahara woke up crying because she wanted mangoes salted with Kenyan sea salt. Sun Wu didn't just call a grocer. He dispatched a private jet. By 6 a.m., the mangoes were on a silver platter. Sun Wu became convinced that everything was a hazard. He tried to baby-proof a mansion filled with priceless Ming vases. Zahara found him one afternoon trying to put rubber corners on the edge of his mahogany desk. Sun Hu, she sighed, the baby isn't even a grape yet. Stop patting the furniture. When Zahara cried because a laundry detergent commercial was too beautiful, the most feared man in the underworld sat on the floor with her, holding her hand and offering her his silk handkerchief. Looking genuinely terrified that he couldn't fix her hormones with a bribe or a threat. Every evening, the town witnessed a strange sight. The black SUVs would block off a park, and the king would walk at a snail's pace, holding Zahara's hand as she waddled through her 3rd trimester. He carried her water, her fan, and her handbag without a shred of shame. If she breathed too heavily, he'd stop and demand a chair be brought to the middle of the sidewalk. I'm just pregnant, Sun Wu. I'm not broken, she would yell. You are carrying the future, he would reply with a straight face, and the future needs to sit down for 5 minutes. The man who once ruled with an iron fist was now completely ruled by a woman who craved pickles and a tiny heartbeat that hadn't even met the world yet. The monster was gone. In his place was a man waiting with bated breath to become a father. Zahara was as stubborn as the day she climbed the wall. She flatly refused to learn the gender of the baby. "Life is a mystery, Sunwoo," she would say, munching on spicy chips. "You've spent your life controlling every variable. For once, just wait for the surprise." Sunwoo, the man who had files on every world leader, was losing his mind. He secretly called the doctor. "If you tell me the sex, I'll donate a new wing to the hospital," he bribed. "If you don't tell me, I'll still donate the wing, but I'll be very annoyed." The doctor, terrified of both the king and his fierce Kenyan wife, stayed silent. Sunwoo resigned himself to buying everything in pairs, blue and pink, trucks, and dolls. He had a nursery the size of a ballroom prepped for every possibility. The disaster struck at 2 a.m. on a humid Tuesday. They were taking a slow walk in the private garden, the same place they had met. Zahara was only 7 months along, but she looked as if she were carrying a small planet. Suddenly, she stopped. A sharp gasp escaped her lips, and the sound of splashing water hit the gravel. "Sunwoo," she whispered, gripping his arm with bone-crushing strength. "It's time." For the first time in his professional life, Park Sun-woo, a man who kept his cool during assassination attempts, completely panicked. He didn't call the guards. He didn't grab his phone. He looked at her stomach, then at her face, and his brain simply rebooted. Now, but the calendar said July. It's only May. You can't do this. It's logically impossible. "Tell that to the babies," Zahara roared as the contraction hit. In a surge of adrenaline, Sunwoo scooped her up. He didn't wait for the armored SUV. He began to sprint. He ran through the garden, through the heavy mahogany doors, and out toward the main gate. He bellowed, his voice echoing like thunder. The guards, seeing their boss sprinting at full speed with a screaming woman in his arms, scrambled to their feet. They tried to bring a car around, but Sunwoo was already halfway down the private driveway. It was a chaotic, dramatic parade, the king of the underworld running like a track star, followed by 10 suited bodyguards in a frantic jog, all while Zahara yelled at him for running too bumpy. They reached the hospital in record time. Sunwoo burst through the emergency doors, nearly taking the hinges off. "My wife, she's broken. Fix her." For 6 agonizing hours, Sunwoo paced the waiting room. He didn't sit. He didn't drink. He just stared at the surgery sign as if he could melt the door with his eyes. He was confused. Why so early? Was she okay? Finally, the doctor emerged, looking exhausted but smiling. "Congratulations, Mr. Park. Your wife is a warrior, and you might want to call the furniture store." "Why?" Sunwoo growled. "Because you didn't have a baby. You had a dynasty. 2 boys and 1 girl, triplets." Sunwoo's knees finally gave out. He sat on a plastic hospital chair, his head in his hands. Triplets, that's why she was so heavy. That's why she was so hungry. The 4 centimeters girl had just tripled his world. The homecoming was a transformation. The cold house of Park was officially dead. The nursing chaos. The mansion was no longer filled with the sound of hushed business deals. It was filled with the rhythmic wah-wah of 3 tiny voices. Sunwoo, the man who used to handle millions of dollars. was now seen at 4 a.m. with a burp cloth over his Armani shoulder, expertly rocking two babies while the third slept on his chest. The tactical guards were now trained in stroller security. The obsidian floors were covered in colorful playmats. Sun Wu even installed a safety command center that was actually just a monitor to watch the babies sleep. The triplets didn't just increase the love between them, they fused them together. Zahara watched her husband change diapers with the same focus he used to take over companies. She saw the way he looked at their daughter, the only girl who would ever rule him more than Zahara did. One evening they sat in the nursery surrounded by the soft breathing of three sleeping miracles. Zahara leaned her head on Sun Wu's shoulder. "Still think I'm a monster?" he whispered, kissing her forehead. "A little bit," she smiled, closing her eyes. "But you're my monster. And you're a pretty good dad for a guy who didn't know how to use a car seat." The king had his queen, his heirs, and a house full of noise. The war was over. The love story of the wall climber and the king had reached its greatest height, and this time, nobody wanted to get down.